in the silence. And now, as we begin to return our attention to this time and this place, we give thanks that we have acknowledged that power and presence within us, that source of infinite good, all possibilities, that we are here to bring forth in its full expression. And for an awareness of that truth, we do give thanks. In the name and through the power of our way-shower, our master teacher, Jesus Christ. Amen. Well, I've had 3 days of methods and ideals. And here, Judy, were you the one who asked me for another copy?
Oh, thank you so much. I'll get it in just a minute. I
Oh,
have to move slowly.
yeah, that's fine.
I'm about to have
That's fine. It was described as pure gold methods and ideals. Why? Because it explains how exactly what we're talking about, which is why I suspect E.V. Ingraham had a hand in writing it, how the methods that we use to bring forth a vision come organically from our understanding of the vision itself. And the notion that every divine idea contains within it what is necessary to bring it forth. Okay. The Fillmores had a vision. And no, that's my copy here. You just have one of those. Mine's all marked up. Also, there's water on the tray, so feel free to get up and help yourself. There's also essential oils. I'm not very hospitable in my preparations tonight, but there's essential oil in the kitchen. If you just walk straight ahead, you will see orange, lemon, and all manner of oils to put in your cocktail. Okay. So what I'd like to do tonight is to have a short review of what we covered last week. And then we will go on to the next chapter, more in depth about the asking prayer. The affirming prayer and the affirming prayer, which is what we use mostly in unity. Okay. So, who remembers what the purpose of prayer is according to this? That's okay. You don't be afraid. I don't bite. You know that. And by the way, Mark Hicks has scanned this, and he said, if we get up to chapter 3 tonight, well, you can read it for yourselves on his website, truthunity.net. So thank you, Mark. He's on the plane right now, so if you are having viewing difficulties, do not email me or Mark because he is inaccessible. All right, so any thoughts on what we learned last week about the purpose of prayer?
I don't remember what we said last week, but I would assume that the purpose of prayer is to make us closer to the Spirit of God.
Okay, all right. Anybody else? It was a little bit surprising that he compares it to the lilies, how the lilies grow.
Yes.
Okay, and so the sort of working definition we have here is that the purpose of prayer is to expand our consciousness of God's presence. So, not just to get close, we do get close, but then to, like, think of your lungs, okay? Your lungs, you breathe in, you expand, and then you release. And that's exactly what happens in prayer. Prayer, not even in the unity sense, but in a general sense, all prayer is about expanding. We call that affirmation, and release, which is denial. You breathe in oxygen, you release carbon dioxide, all right? In another sense, you release power from within you, all right? Prayer, remember he said, which was one of my favorite statements, is spiritual breathing. So you breathe in that Spirit of God. And in that process, things get released. As you expand your capacity, then things get released. That's an important point because people don't generally understand that when you pray, that there's any kind of anything except perfect bliss, perfect answers. Okay, and a lot of people say my prayer wasn't answered. Have you heard people say that? There are many people who say their prayers are always answered, and there are some who say their prayers are not answered. And so that's when we have to look into how we engage the process. And his point is about considering the lilies was that the lily is a bulb. And in the beginning, it draws its nourishment from within itself, all right? There's that hard sort of shell, and then at the heart of it is this inner nature that is here to be expanded. And as the lily grows, then that hard shell around it decreases. So what happens in prayer is we expand our capacity. That's Jerry. Expand our capacity to know the presence of the divine. Okay. Even in the beginning stages, let's say you just go in to a certain level, just closing your eyes and beginning to settle in, and you get a sense that there's something there that you haven't experienced before. Kind of like as you approach the ocean, you smell the scent of the salt air and feel the breeze. That's kind of like a preliminary step that gets you excited because you know there is a whole world of the unknown within you. A grand mystery, right? Okay, and so we then have to consider that it's not about a goal of getting something, but it's about expanding our capacity to receive that which is already prepared for us. And one thing that is a good habit to cultivate. And I'm open to being challenged by this, but it's a good habit to feel grateful in that you come to know that you have a capacity, a greater capacity than you have yet experienced. Because the depth within you is infinite. We are so used to thinking of ourselves as limited beings, expecting difficulties, that it takes a real shift of going beyond the usual thinking that occupies us on a daily basis to bring in new consciousness. We don't have to just think about things in a different way. We have to expand our capacity to think differently. And I always hear it as very sort of glib when I hear people say, oh, well, just change your thinking. Yeah, just change. Just change it.
Easier said than done.
You have to change the capacity in consciousness before you can, in a significant way, excuse me, change your thinking. So that habit of gratitude, and you can feel grateful that there is so much more for you to experience than what you have already experienced. So prayer is about growth, just like everything else in nature. Everything grows, and it grows in the direction of more fulfillment of itself. If you plant seeds, plant the apple seed, and you expect an apple tree, right? You plant Rose of Sharon and you expect that, do you not? Acorn. Now, yeah, everything's contained in that acorn, but until there is some cultivation, it's not going to grow into the oak that is contained there. And like that, we have the image, likeness implanted within us, God's very own nature and capacity to behave in a godlike manner. But it takes cultivation. We have to cultivate, as Eric Butterworth says, create the conditions in consciousness that make that growth inevitable. And so going within, and you were right in saying that God is as near to us as breathing. That's very true. But it's not just about going in, it's about coming out and bringing with us some of that inner knowing, inner wisdom, inner awareness. We have a broader perspective. And Emily Cady says, and also E.B. Ingraham says, that we have to use the light that we already have before we can receive more. Myrtle Fillmore said, it's not enough to be good. You have to be good for something. I like that. Okay, in other words, you don't just sit there and meditate, but as a result, you have released some of that power from within you, and it's then your joy and responsibility to make use of it, hopefully for the good of all. Okay, so it's about desire and fulfillment. God desires that creative principle desires to express fully through us. And as we grow in our capacity, we become aware of that desire. You look like you want to say
I
something.
do want to say something because I think it's real easy to get hung up on the good for something thing and to think I have to be good for something. And I don't think that's what it is at all. I don't think it's that we have to define the for something. I don't think we have to find the for something. And I think in a world where so many people are looking for their mission, their passion, what are they going to do when they grow up? What's their ministry? What's their this? What's their that? It is all that stuff is almost counterproductive to the what you find in the good for something when you go into the silence and come out.
Okay.
That it's not a doing as we traditionally think of it, but it's a being that leads us to do it. But that is very, very different than the good for something. But well, now I'm going to go wash the windows, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, or I'm going to go give everything to the poor and go. I mean, it's just a different dimension, and it's a different form. It's not chemical form of a good for something.
Yeah.
I don't quite have words for it, but it's really very different from how we usually think of that
Yes.
good for something.
And my notion of what that means is that you can't just sit there and store up. You can to a certain degree, but when the cloth is saturated, then you have to go into, and it doesn't have to be doing, but some form of activity. It could be mental or spiritual, or just simply radiating what you have, smiling at someone, doing a favor for someone, giving a gift. But you have to use your light before you will receive more.
Here's the thing that I think, and I think this is where I get caught up. It's impossible not to do that if you're going into silence.
That's true.
We're not talking about something you have to do. We're talking about something you're going to do.
Right.
And that's a big deal.
Okay.
In a world where we're trained into you have to do, to be more aware of, you're going to do, you're going to be doing.
Okay.
It's a different kind, it's a different part of the verb.
Okay.
Anyway.
All
enough of
right.
that. I just wanted to
Prayer,
share that.
I understand prayer as a dynamic, I don't think of it as something that you say in order to get what you want from a willing or unwilling creator. Yeah, and it's process, and it's a process of sustaining your attention on the possibilities that are there within you, knowing that there is always more to know, always more to understand, always more growth for you in terms of the power and presence of God. There is no goal. It's not a goal that really makes you happy. It is the sense that you are progressing, you are moving, you are growing in your awareness of the presence of God. And when you feel that, know that it is that desire that is not yours, but it is the divine that wants to come through you.
Oh, it's like a relationship that's working
Yeah.
both ways.
It is.
Nothing you can do by yourself.
That's exactly right. Yes. And yes, so another important point is he says, remember to whom or what you pray. And I'm sure that all of you can tell me what the answer to that is. To what or to whom do we pray?
The Spirit of God within.
Okay, yes. Within. God is a power and a presence within. All right. It's a creative principle that's hard for people to grasp because it's very abstract. And that's why Jesus would say, Father, all right, knowing the intimacy that exists between Father and Son. Okay. And the name Emmanuel, God with us. God is with us, and then God is within us, and then we are within that Godhead. Right? We become it. Okay. And he said, as to Jesus, no intermediaries. No intermediaries. You pray direct, face-to-face, direct communion. You don't have to go through a minister. You don't have to go through a priest. You don't have to go through anyone else. You have connection to the source within you. And so what prayer is conditioning the mind really to receive. I've written down, and we talked a little bit about this last time, the asking prayer. Ask whatsoever you will in my name, and the Father will give it to you. Think about how a child asks. A child asks at different stages. A child will ask for something that he or she does not have the power or ability to do for himself. All right? Makes sense? And when the child receives, I heard a child once in some fast foods restaurant, and her father said, "What do you want?" And she said, "A chocolate milkshake." Well, that child couldn't read a menu, and so she got what she wanted. And so you ask when you think that getting that is beyond your capacity, and then when you receive it, you have expanded your capacity to receive. And it's not to create a dependence on outer things or people, but it's progressively to always increase your capacity to receive. And I'm sure all of you have had a desire for something that maybe you thought was unlikely or impossible, or that it couldn't happen for you, and in a state of crisis maybe, you asked for help. And I know some who will not ask for help, or for whom it is hard to ask for help. But isn't it better to say, I need help, than to try and go it alone? I mean, isn't that going to be, my experience is that when I'm saying I'm willing to ask for help, that help comes pouring in much more than I could have ever anticipated. I'm open to hearing any experiences, either contrary or in support of that. But part of the difficulty with this prayer is that we don't really know what it is that we want. All right. We don't know the essence of what it is that we want.
That's the hardest part. Know what you want.
To know what you want. That is the hardest part. And it's not wrong, as Charles Fillmore said, it's not wrong to pray for things. But do you really want to have to demonstrate the next loaf of bread and the next pair of shoes?
If you're hungry and shoeless.
Yes, that's right. Yes. So it's not wrong. And he said, nothing is too wicked. Nothing is too wicked. You can ask for anything. And if it fills a need in that moment, that is the desire of your heart. That is the desire of your heart. Then as time goes on and you say, oh, I have the capacity to fulfill a need, and then it becomes, I desire health. Oh, well, isn't wholeness something you have within you? So, do you believe in wholeness and sickness? He tells a story in here about a man who was praying for protection during a pretty severe storm. He was praying for God's protection, all the while believing that the building was going to cave in. Do we pray like that sometimes? Pray for health all the time, believing that it's not going to come. Yeah. So know that law of growth, of that capacity to receive, is at every phase of creation. The real essence of that quote is in my name. Whatever you pray for, from a consciousness of God's presence, from a consciousness of the Christ, the Father will give it to you, because the Father and I are one, Jesus said. So, from what consciousness do you pray is the thing that you have to ask yourself. Are you praying and being doubtful at the same time? I don't know. He uses yeah, go ahead.
It seems to me in that, are you praying and being doubtful at the same time, rather than opposites, they're paradox. And that it's the very doubtfulness that brings us closer, more deeply into the presence. That it's a paradox, not a dichotomy. And that it's part of what draws us in closer and closer to what I would call the silence.
He's drawing the distinction between what you just said and the affirmative prayer, where people, this is what unity has, where you know that it's there, and so you pray from a notion that it is already there. Whereas what you're saying is you're praying and you're not sure that it's there. And then when you receive, but when you pray, it's the feeling behind the prayer that determines the outcome, not the words that you say. It's the intention. Does that fit into this dichotomy?
Well, dichotomy versus paradox, and the paradox is, and all I'm saying is that, we're so good at separate. If you're not doing it this way, you're not doing it right, rather than the part that when you're not doing this way, it's part of the rightness of the process. When you're praying, not believing, it's actually part of the process of coming to believe. That it's part of the human spiritual experience to stand in disbelief to be able to come into belief. It's the old thing, there's no use in light whatsoever if you don't know there's darkness. I mean, a candle in a well-lit room is nothing. It's going, and so it's this paradox of instead of discounting the experience of praying and not believing, to understand the praying and not believing is the introduction into the moving in.
And so what would you say then if someone was praying for what? Help, all right? And all the while believing that it was beyond the point of help, and that person was receiving the answer that he expected, thereby reinforcing the doubt. Is that also a possibility?
I think it's an overstated simplicity. I think it's too simplistic. I think that that's just too simplistic. And I don't know why, and I don't know how, but it just seems, because it's like many friends who died from AIDS and cancer. We've all had this stuff. It prayed, affirmed the whole thing, whether they were believing or not. One day, I asked God many years ago when a lot of my friends were dying. I said, they're praying to be healed and they're praying to be healthy, and they're dying. What's this all about? And I heard that still small voice says, what's saying that they're not getting the better part of the ride?
Yeah, really. Yeah.
It's like how quickly we are to judge the impact of the paradox and living in paradox and the human experience by what we in Unity call manifestation. And it's like it takes a much broader.
Yes, good point.
Sorry, I'm just.
No,
I don't mean sorry, but I'm
you're
just
not
saying,
sorry.
No, I'm not. It's just. It's such rich, fertile ground to look at the full human experience and to say all this experience is part of the spiritual life.
Uh-huh.
And instead of cutting it and parsing away between what's right and what's wrong about it, to parcel it into how it becomes.
How it becomes. All right. Well, here's one then, and I present this to everyone. Think of a parable of Jesus that illustrates the right use, and I'm using right in a sense of metaphysically right, righteous, serves the capacity to grow, all right? Think of a Bible story of the right use of your own light.
Your own what?
Well, your own spiritual gifts or your own consciousness, okay? Think of a Bible story, because remember, it's about the capacity to receive, the capacity to grow. And there's two Bible stories that I can think of that show what happens when you actually make use of what you have received. So we're all here to increase our capacity to receive, but then what becomes of that capacity? Nothing until we apply it, right? Can you think of a Bible story?
When Jesus said, rise up and walk, no?
Well, Jesus was already there. I'm talking about when Jesus talks to
Stories.
someone. This is a parable, and he illustrates his point. All right. Do you recall a parable of the talents? All right. Talents. What happens?
I can't hear very well.
Talents.
Oh,
To one man, okay, you go ahead.
Well, one man uses his talent, the other one buries it.
There are three.
And
One,
yeah.
yeah, that's right. The master gives out, talents is a monetary unit, but it works for talents in our sense of the word as well. So one man, he gives 10. Another, he gives, I think it was 2. And another, he gives 1. And so the first two increased their, they invested, they made use of their talents. And this other one buried it in the ground. Do you hide your light under a bushel? Yeah. Interesting. There's a similar one, the parable of the pounds, which is, the same idea of using what is given to you. You may have a talent, but if you don't use your talent as a path of service, then isn't that like burying it in the ground?
There's another parable that's coming to my mind in relationship to prayer. Maybe it's relevant, maybe it's not, but it's the sower and the seed.
Oh, yeah.
And as you were talking, the thought came through that sometimes our prayer is like the seed that's thrown on rocky ground, and sometimes our prayer is the prayer that goes into fertile ground. And that part of our job and part of what happens in the silence is we come to understand what the fertile ground is and to know the fertile ground, so we can make better use of the seed that's given us to sow. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's similar to, creating an environment in which the seed, like the gardener cultivating the soil so that the seed can grow.
Which maybe also that is praying in the name of Jesus.
Yes.
Is praying in the cultivated soil.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to the degree that we do that, it's the same degree that the growth is. That's a very good example. Right, because seeds, that parable of the seeds shows you all the different types of soil where a seed can be received or where it can't grow. Sometimes, it's just carried off by the birds. Yeah. Okay. So if you pray for something that is beyond what you think your present capacity is, there is a certain expectancy. Okay, like seek and you shall find. All right, when we seek that inner kingdom, is there not an expectancy that we will find some treasure, we will find some good? If we ask, is there not the expectancy that we will receive? If you knock on the door, don't you expect the door to open? So the ask, seek, knock prayer in my view, contains that element of expectancy, which is very inspiring to something good is going to happen, that sort of feeling. Okay. He uses the Lord's Prayer as an example. So this is, as he says, for, just a few simple statements. So when we say our Father, what are we really saying?
They were all one.
We are all from the same source. We are all equal in God's eyes. We are all, therefore, we all come from one Father. Doesn't that make us all brothers and sisters? All right. Oneness. You say a lot when you say our Father. So you are essentially praying to oneness. Oneness. That's like the Aborigines in the story of the mutant message. And I've told this story before. I don't know if you remember it, but the woman in Topeka who was some form of doctor, I think a naturopathic doctor, and she took a sabbatical and went to Australia because she wanted to help the Aborigines. And the Western notion of help, the Aborigines were outcasts, and they weren't meant to live in cities, but they had been herded up to live in cities, so she helped them develop their own business, and they wanted to reward her in a way that she never expected, which was in a 4-month trek across the Australian desert. They taught her what real prayer was. They taught her what real healing was. What, way beyond what we even think. And so their prayer, and they had to have a translator because they did not use words to communicate. They only used words for singing and celebration. So they communicated because they knew their oneness. So it was like telepathic communication. So each day, and this is the translation, oneness. It was a prayer to oneness. And each day, a different member of this tribe would make this prayer to oneness and then state what he wanted, what animal or what plant to show up for food. Okay, this is desert. All right, and Marla Morgan, who wrote this, she said, I'd look out onto this desert. For miles, there was absolutely nothing. But at dinner time, there was this expectancy that it would show up. And healing, that was an amazing story, where one member volunteered, fell down this embankment and had multiple fractures. And immediately all of them formed a line like this, all the way down, and they hoisted this man all the way back up. And when he was up there, the medicine man sang to the bones, and she watched the bones go back in place. Just sang to the bones. And then the medicine woman put some ointment on the leg, and they continued walking in the desert. I love stories like that because it expands your concept of healing and what can be done. It's such a wonderful story. And the reason they had an oral history, and they had art, they had paintings that captured their history, and this was very secret, very private. And she had to pass the test, though, before they would allow her to share in that. And the test was this, that every member of the tribe had taken a turn issuing the prayer, being in charge of the food and the water each day. And one day they turned to her and they said, your turn. Yeah, panic. Panic, absolute panic. And she turned first to one and then to the other, and no one would help her. We've carried you along for all this time. You can do it yourself. And so here she was given the responsibility of, they could have died. And for 2 days they wandered through the desert and were very dehydrated and really quite close to death. And then she remembered something. It's like a memory comes up. And she remembered that the medicine woman had given her a rock, a little rock, at the beginning of the journey. And she put the rock in her mouth to generate saliva. And she started talking about water, and she envisioned every kind of water you could possibly find. And within a half hour, and she described how that first taste of warm water was like ecstasy, and so because she had demonstrated that capacity to provide for those who had provided for her, they allowed her to share in their history, and they gave her a mission to come back and describe what had happened. They had told her, we're not reproducing because there's no environment for our children to grow up in. And she said it took her 10 years before she had the courage to write the book. And then when she did, the Australian government got wind of it. And so when it was reprinted, they made her say that it was fiction, and it was not fiction. I heard her tell the story, and she is amazing. And so she was to spread the message amongst the mutations. We are the mutant ones. That we have lost that connection with our environment. We have destroyed our own environment, our air, our water, our world. And so we're supposed to tell the message, there's only one. Anyway, that's a sidebar, but whenever I think of, a prayer about healing, I think sing to the bones and watch them go back in place. I once asked a class, what limits do you put on healing? And one woman said the only limit she put on healing was that a person could not regrow a limb. But I know Dr. Chopra tells a case of somebody regrowing a limb. All things are possible. And every time you see something that's sort of beyond your notion of healing, it expands your capacity of what is possible. Right? Okay. Well, hallowed be thy name. How do we hallow God? How do we hallow God? That means to make sacred. Right?
Respect,
What is
honor,
we honor the power and presence within us. That's true. Hallowed has to do with wholeness. So we honor the wholeness that is within us. Wholeness is your nature. Name equals nature. Thy kingdom come. Okay, that's to me, like I have this image of this great big bowl that you're holding out and allowing the kingdom to come and to fill it with the infinite good that is there.
The kingdom is already here, we're just not looking at it.
And we're not aware that the source is within us. And so we say, thy kingdom come. Whatever it is, whatever good you have for me, I'm open to receiving it. Okay, thy will be done. That's what we do in prayer in steps, is that we align our will with the divine will, and that will is for absolute good
Let God be God.
in us, yes. And someone today, this afternoon, was reminding me of Emma Curtis Hopkins, who said, there's infinite good and you ought to have it. You know, that's not an exact quote, but it's like that.
It's good for me and I ought
And
to
there's
have
God, there's good, yeah, good for me and I ought to have it. You know, and it's the Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Okay, what about give us this day? Oh, thy will be done. Yeah, give us this day our daily bread.
whatever we need.
Yes, whatever we need on every level. Okay, including a physical level, an emotional level, a spiritual level. Give us this day our daily bread. Bread, substance. Give us the substance. And here's the one that is difficult. And forgive us our debts or our trespasses, how I learned it as a child. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. What is it in the act of forgiveness? Let's say you have somebody who is indebted to you. Now there's Bible stories here too. And in one case, one servant is forgiven. He's forgiven for his debt. And then he goes, and someone who owes him a debt, he makes sure he gets in prison. All right? Forgive. In the act of forgiving, you are releasing yourself from bondage. Are you not? So as you release yourself from bondage, that's how you are released. That's how you are forgiven. And it doesn't even matter about this other person. You know, that as you release them, you are released from that bondage.
Yes, when you don't forgive somebody, the not forgiving hurts you worse than it hurts the person that you're not forgiving, because they don't know you're not forgiving.
That's right. Yeah. Well, they, in some cases, a person is totally oblivious of the impact that they have had.
I think the forgiveness is really very much about getting rid of the preoccupation. If it's getting rid of the preoccupation. If it's forgiven, it's done with. If I have a business and someone owes me money, and every month I'm sending out statements to them, every month I'm occupying my time, my treasure, trying to collect that bill. If I forgive that debt, it's just done. I don't have to preoccupy myself anymore with something that's in the past. It frees up all kinds of channels, so to speak. So I think the wonderful thing about forgiveness is the channels it clears. It does something for me.
Beautiful, yeah.
You know, to clear out so that my mind can go back to the kingdom. You know, so that my mind can get back into the space I want.
That's very good. Very good. I like that. Yeah. And so, the Lord, by the way, 816-301-6304. If anyone is watching and would like to call in, ask a question, make a comment about prayer, increasing your capacity to receive what has already been given. Okay. 816-301-6304. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory. I know the Catholics have not included that, but that's part of the Lord's Prayer that is pretty standard in our Bible, isn't it? For thine is the kingdom.
It's in the Bible, though. I think it's apocryphal.
Oh, it's in the Apocrypha?
I don't think it's biblical, but I'd have to go back and look at it.
Because I know how Jim says the Lord's Prayer, and they don't say that. They don't say that part.
Not that it matters, but it's a beautiful part of the prayer.
It is.
Sorry, I'm not talking
Yeah, it is a beautiful part. For thine is the kingdom and the power. The presence of God is the kingdom. It's not what God has, it's what God is. That is the kingdom, the power, the glory. God is power. God is infinite abundance. God is wholeness. God is the answer to your prayer. It's not that God gives you prosperity. God is the substance that fills your every need. And so he uses this as the E.V. Ingraham uses this as an example of an asking prayer, an asking prayer that progressively moves you into that expectancy that there is always more that you can receive. And he says, I have a quote here, that when you pray with faith, God will give you greater than you ask. Do you believe that? We heard a story today from someone in the workshop, Prentice. He was a minister in Bob and Margot's class, and he,
Prentice?
yeah, and suffered a stroke, and walked into the hospital, and the next morning he found he couldn't talk, he couldn't walk, he had to relearn everything, and so he couldn't move his mouth to say the words, but what he was saying was, God is here. Talk about praying with faith when it sure doesn't look like anything's good or that God's presence is here. But praying with the kind of faith that, like God and I can do it together, that kind of an attitude. I of myself can do nothing, but with God all things are possible. And he's he's definitely recovered his ability to speak. I have to say it was a very powerful speech.
Yeah. That he lost it in him.
Walking is still a bit of a difficulty for him. But, that kind of path of learning that it seems to be so steep, the dark night, really the depth of the dark night, and to have that kind of light. And I think there's a relationship between that. But that, and it's not like, oh, what did I do to attract this bad thing to me? It wasn't like that at all. But it's like, how can I work with God to make use of this and be grateful for this next day of life? Yeah. But even today, I heard people say, just change your thinking. And to me, that just sounds a little superficial. Not that it's not important to change your thinking. I don't mean that. I mean, your thinking changes as you increase your awareness of that power and presence within you. Is that not true? Yeah.
Okay. Me.
You.
You know me in the silence.
Yes.
I don't know I am on that. I've said for some time now that I think going into the silence is alchemical. That going into the silence in and of itself changes us.
Absolutely.
Without doing anything, without thinking anything, without believing anything. Just going and being silent changes us. I've seen too much to think otherwise about that when people work on silence. When going into the silence, what it changes also is our experience and how we're experiencing life. And what I see is when our experience changes, our thinking changes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's the change in thinking, is that almost the experience has to change first.
It definitely does.
Or at least that's one avenue for it. I don't know what that there's any has to be.
Absolutely. And
But-
yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think that is the missing link to what is a beautiful philosophy. All right.
It's also the mystical journey.
It's the mystical journey. And that was the whole point of what I went to talk about. Because the next week we're going to talk about the prayer of silence. And what this book says about the prayer of silence and what this says about the silence is that the soul, which consists of, you all know, the subconscious, the conscious, the feeling, the thinking, the intuition, you name, all right? All of that is the contents of the soul. And how can the soul increase its capacity to receive? Only through silence, because silence is of infinite depth. All right? You can go into the silence. And I don't know, I think of my own journey and what has been one of the most difficult things for me is overcoming a fear of authority, particularly authoritarian men. Okay? All right? And so, I had many strategies, but it's only through continuously coming into my own sense of authority that I say that this kind of authority has no power over me anymore. And you're right. And, way back in Iowa, where I had felt that I had been wronged, and 5 years later, I came back, and they were telling me there was something I couldn't do. I could not do these classes anymore. And I said, oh, yes, I can. And they said, well, you don't you have a choice. You can either, leave this organization, or you can stop teaching these Reiki classes. And I said, oh, here, I'm going to keep on teaching Reiki classes, And and that for me, that was a sign that just constantly touching the source allows that spiritual power to say, and when I heard people, I probably shouldn't say this over the internet, but when I hear people saying they have to ask permission, children ask permission to do something. And when I hear people say, am I going to get in trouble if, what if I ask permission and then I get in trouble as a result? Excuse me?
That's one of the wonderful things about getting older. You can't be flunked and you can't be fired.
True.
What else can you do to me?
They don't give us raises either.
And they don't.
That's why we have to go to source.
Absolutely. Well, 816-301-6304. This is your absolute last chance to get in on this conversation. And nobody's calling in. I have a lot of messages here, but none of them are about the class. So anything else that you all want to say? I'm excited about the prayer of silence because this is the one that has meant the most to me, because prayer is silence. And as I've told you, I had to learn to put words to it. And Charles Fillmore says the most powerful prayer is the silent one. Why? Because when your attention is at the deepest level, you are as if praying, that God is praying through you. All right? If you can imagine, here we are at the surface, and then as our awareness goes inward, it becomes more and more concentrated, and we reach this finest level and go beyond even that, and that's that contact that releases something, and just that little moment takes away so much fear. That takes away a difficulty, just a flash like that, a moment in the silence. That's a prayer. Anything that is sustained attention on the power and presence. So your big desires are more easily fulfilled. If you are praying for $10, you will receive $10. But you're not leaving yourself open to receiving more. All right? So your prayer is what determines you've kind of your prayer contains the answer for what you've asked for. So you want to continually increase. It's natural that your prayer is bigger as you go deeper into the silence, because then you are closer to the source where it can be fulfilled. Make sense?
A thought has been rippling through my mind throughout the evening. I didn't know if I was going to share it or not, but it's just a very simple sentence. The deeper we go into prayer, we become the hem of the garment.
For sure.
We become the hem of the garment.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And why that feels important to me at this minute is it's so easy to get focused on our desires. And that's not a bad thing. But I think so much of what the reason, I don't know about reason, but in truth, the more that is fulfilled for us, the more it draws others to find their own
That's
fulfillment.
exactly right.
That it's given not for us, but through us for others.
For others. And Myrtle said that so beautifully when she said, I have come so close to breaking through into that wonderful world of the kingdom, and I have no words to articulate that. And so my role is to be and to behold, so that, and this is the hem of the garment, so that when others come into my presence, they see in me what they yearn for, and that lifts them up simply by being in that presence. You know, that is the absolute statement of Myrtle that has captivated me, I have to say, because isn't that what we're all here for? To be the presence of God, not still seeking it. Right? So we seek the kingdom, but the kingdom is really seeking us. Yeah. And so, yeah, we think it's our desire, and it is our desire, but it's really God's desire. And that becomes stronger and stronger when we realize that, oh, it's not me, that there's a power and presence that wants to express in and through me. And so we are all being groomed to be instruments of the divine, to serve in whatever capacity we are here. And that's not a job. It doesn't mean being a minister or anything, but we all do have gifts, and we use those gifts, and you can be a beam of light for someone.
Let your little light shine.
Let it shine. That's right. And the ultimate vision was put all the forces together, all the coherent forces together, all the silent forces together in all of these people around the world. This is silent unity. And build the body of Christ. We can do the greater works because there's more of us, but we have to share the vision and share that practice. If we want the results, we have to engage in the practice that got them there. Well, I could talk on, as you know, we could all probably talk on for a long time, but I don't want to keep you forever. I do, though, actually. And so let's close our eyes and be grateful for this time together, a time of knowledge, a time of sharing, a time of being together in fellowship, knowing that God is moving in and through each of us, that God is active and present, and we are grateful. We are grateful. We are grateful that we always have free and access to that infinite source that we carry with us. Thank you, God.